right. Well, thank you all for coming back. You know, it's always terrible when you give a presentation and you're doing a follow-up to it and nobody shows up for part two. So I appreciate you all being back for this. Just as a way of getting started, it would be helpful for me to get a sense. How many of you are caregivers? Just, you know, identify that way. So a big chunk of the room. Good. And how many of you are direct professionals, actually hands-on delivering services? Got a bunch of people there too. And people who are primarily academics, professors, that kind of thing. All in the middle there. Oh, over there on that side too. Do we have any public administrators, government officials, anyone like that? Okay, that gives me a sense about the group. Any direct consumers of service? All right. Lots of family members, lots of practitioners, and lots of academics. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of the family, about the role that caregivers play in psychiatric rehabilitation, and ways that the whole mental health community can be more supportive to caregivers as they carry out their important roles in this whole process. I come to this having spent parts of my entire career doing this. For the last 40 years, I've been involved with family support groups, and my dissertation area was actually developing a package for training mental health professionals on how to be more helpful to families that include a person with a serious mental illness. So I've been at this for a long time, and I just want to start by saying to all of you caregivers, thank you not just for being here, but thank you for the work that you do every day. I understand how complicated it is for you. I understand the stresses of your caregiving as well as the joys that come with that. And I know how tough it is some days. So I'm so glad to see you here. It means a lot to me to have so many caregivers in the audience. Thank you. So I'd like you to think for a minute about a close family member that you have. Could be a parent or a sibling or a spouse, and think about that person and the importance of that person in your life. Now imagine that that person has just experienced a major medical crisis that's a little mysterious, hard to know why it occurred or what happened, and has just been rushed to the emergency room. Right? How are you feeling as that's going on? I mean, what are you thinking? What are you doing about that? Right? And you go to the hospital, to the emergency room, to find out what's happening with your loved one, and you have an opportunity to meet with a physician at the emergency room. What do you want from that physician? What do you want from the staff in the emergency room at that moment when you have a family member who's in crisis and you're there trying to figure out what's going on? What emotions are you experiencing? And what's the impact that that kind of an event has on your entire family? Right? That's what goes on for family members who have a loved one with a serious mental illness all the time. You know, there are these crises that occur that they don't completely understand, that they're trying to make sense of, and they're looking to mental health professionals for support around that. When you have a loved one who's in distress, it is not just a problem for your loved one who's in distress. It is a whole family crisis. When you have a loved one who's in trouble, the whole family shares that pain. And you know, these kinds of crises occur in every family. You know, every family has these kinds of things that happen. Sometimes they're short term, you know, someone falls and breaks a leg and you get that done in a fairly short time. Some are ongoing or cyclical, like serious mental illness. But the dynamics in this are really similar for almost all family crises. Now, I mentioned in the last presentation the definition of recovery that I like to use: reclaiming your life in the aftermath of a crisis. And crises happen to all individuals, and they happen to all families. And in the last session, I talked a little bit about what it meant for individuals to reclaim their lives after a crisis. Well, families have to do the same thing. When a family member experiences a major mental illness, we need to be focused not just on recovery for that family member who has a mental illness. The entire family has to find a way to come back, to be resilient, to bounce back and recover from what has been a very difficult experience in the family. Family support is all about recovery, right? I mean, we need to focus on helping the person with a serious mental illness to recover, but we need to focus on helping the family as well, right? And like I said, bad things happen to all of us, and professionals need to be bonded with families to help make families recover, as well as individuals with serious mental illnesses who are having the crises themselves. One of the things that we know from all of the research that's been done on family support, family education, is that if we're really interested as practitioners in helping people with serious mental illness recover, we've got to pay attention to the family as well. Every study that I've ever seen on family support has shown if we give families more and better support, their loved ones with serious mental illness do better as well. So if we're really committed to good outcomes for our clients, we need to be committed to supporting families, because it's a really good path towards helping the person with a serious mental illness recover as well. So in the time I've got today, I want to do a few things. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that families that include a person with a mental illness face. I want to work for all of us at developing maybe a little more empathy and a little more patience with families who are in crisis. I want to share with you some practical strategies that we can use to improve our effectiveness in supporting families. And like I talked about in the last session, I hope that you walk away today with at least one thing that you can start doing in your own lives that will make things better. I'd love to have you think about one or two things that you could start doing when you leave here today that will improve the quality of the community here in Karachi to support the families of people that include a person with a serious mental illness. There's a psychiatrist that I know named Werner Mendel, who always started out, did a lot of work with families, and he was one of the really early people in psychiatry in the United States who said we need to start treating families as part of the solution, not part of the problem. And Werner, when he would start working with families, would say, I don't know what causes schizophrenia, I don't know how to prevent it, I don't know how to cure it, and with that in mind, let's see what we can do to help. Right? We don't know lots of things about serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, but that shouldn't stop us from being helpful to people and to families. And we need to step forward and be honest with families about what we can do and what our limitations are as well. So families are generally not expecting practitioners to be able to solve this. They're expecting practitioners to step in and help them make it 10% better. So what can we do to help our clients and our loved ones and ourselves do better in the face of some of these mysterious illnesses? Now, mental illness is a really common tragedy in families. It's something that happens all the time. 4 out of 10 of the leading causes of disability worldwide are mental illnesses, right? That's World Health Organization data. In the United States, 10% of children and adolescents suffer from serious emotional disorders. 1 in 17 Americans live with a serious long-term mental illness. You have somebody with a significant mental illness in every 4th or 5th family in the United States. So this is not something that happens to someone else. It happens in every neighborhood, in every demographic, in every community. And you saw in one of the early slides that Shaheen put up about the frequency of serious mental illness in Pakistan, and estimates that there may be 20 million people with serious mental illness. So this is something that happens commonly. It's a really big deal, a really big crisis, and it happens all the time. Now, mental illnesses are really tough diseases to have. There are a lot of reasons why you don't want to have a long-term serious disabling mental illness. Having one of those illnesses is highly associated with a big risk factor for poverty, for early death, for developing a substance abuse problem in addition to the mental illness, for being unemployed, for ending up incarcerated as a result of some kind of a minor encounter with the law, for not being able to finish school, for interruptions in education and career, for being isolated, for impaired wellness, for challenges in building social relationships and getting married, for interruptions in the kinds of things that all of us take for granted are going to occur in our lives. So it's a really big deal developing one of these serious mental illnesses. And while I said in the earlier presentation that there's hope for recovery, that doesn't take away from the fact that having one of these illnesses is a really difficult thing for people who have them, and a difficult thing for their families who try to wrap around them and support them. So when I say it's hard for families as well, this is data from a study that I was involved with, a national study in the United States on the impact that having a loved one with a mental illness has. In the family members that we surveyed, 58% of them reported high levels of anxiety as a result of having a loved one with a serious mental illness. 58% reported high levels of frustration. 56% talked about worry. 55% talked about significant burden that they felt as a result of their caregiving. 48% reported high levels of depression that were associated with their efforts to support their family member. Grief, fear, anger. Almost a quarter of them reported physical illnesses that they attributed to the mental illness that they were trying to support their family member with, either new ones or exacerbations. You know, I used to have hypertension, but it was under control, and now it's out of control because of the stresses associated with caregiving. 42% said they experienced significant financial problems as a result of it. So even divorce is common in these kinds of situations. So, you know, people with serious mental illnesses have lots of difficulties they face, and caregivers have tremendous difficulties as well as they step up and try to support their loved ones. And in the mental health system, at least in the States, I think sometimes we haven't been as good about recognizing what a difficult thing this is for caregivers as well. Families face very hard questions. You know, they have a loved one, usually a young person when this develops, who develops a serious mental illness, and they try to answer questions like, is this illness, you know, normal for a young adult, or is it something that's going to last and stay forever? If I'm more strict and controlling about it and try to be directive and tell my loved one what to do, is that going to make things better, or is that going to make them worse? You know, I want to be supportive, but if I'm too supportive, is that enabling? You know, if I help them and support them and take care of things for them, is that just going to make them more isolated and less able to take care of themselves? Are they ever going to be able to work or to finish school or to get married? You know, how do I help them do what's best in the long run? Where do I find good services? How do I pay for services? How do we even know what a good service is? How do I tell a good service from a bad service? And I could go on, but family members struggle with these kinds of questions, right? It's a very difficult thing. And in spite of the fact that families face those stresses, in spite of the fact that they often don't get the kind of support they need from mental health providers to do the caregiving that they need to do, families remain the center of mental health care in most communities. And from what I've been able to learn over the week that I've been here, I think that's probably true in Karachi as well. You know, that providers come and go. You know, you may be seeing a psychiatrist, it may be a different one a year or two from now. You may have been hospitalized here, you may be hospitalized there with completely different people. Providers come and go and change. The constant are family members. You know, no one cares for you like your family. You know, they love you and they want things to work. They've also got really intimate knowledge of your situation and your history, and really good ability to tell when things aren't quite right. They might not be able to explain exactly why they're not right. They might not have the words or the concepts for it, But families get a really good sense when things are starting to not work out so well with their loved one, and they can raise the flag, we need to do something really, really early in it. Families often serve as the primary care coordinator. They're the ones who make sure that their loved ones get to appointments. They're the ones that make sure that their loved ones fill their prescriptions for medication. They make sure that medications get taken. They help the primary care physicians to learn about what the mental health part of this is and to pay attention to it. They connect all of those pieces. They're care coordinators. And just at a really concrete level, families provide money and love and housing and advocacy and a place in their world, in the world for their loved ones to be. It's why I always say families are the real heroes in the community mental health system. They're the ones who make this work, even more than professionals. And I say this with great humility because I'm a mental health professional. I'm a family member too, but I identify mostly as a mental health professional. And we in mental health professions really try to be helpful to families, but I know that we often fail. There are differences in goals and perspectives that we have. Family member may have a goal of how do I help my loved one get back to school? And the practitioner may have a goal of how do I help the person to get on the right medication so we can decrease symptoms. Related but not the same thing. There was a study that was done where a group of family members and a group of providers listed the most important goals in therapy. And when you looked at the statistical correlation between the two groups of what are the most important things in therapy, they were completely unrelated. Right? What family members wanted from therapy and providers and what providers wanted to do in therapy for family members were very, very different. So we have really big differences in goals and perspective. Sometimes too, I still see providers blaming families for the mental illness. And it's not as crude as it used to be, where we used to say, you probably didn't give your child enough love or affection when they were 2 years old, and that's why they developed schizophrenia. We don't do much of that anymore, but in subtle ways, we still blame the family. The family should have tried harder. The family shouldn't be quite as mean. They should be more understanding. They should work harder to support their loved one. There's subtle blame that still goes on. And mental health providers have their limitations as well. They've only got so much money and time. There are only so many services to go around. They can't do everything. Providers also have differences in accountability. The caregivers are going to be at home that night with their loved one. Practitioners have different levels of accountability. They get to go home and they don't see the family member after that. They don't see the person with the mental illness. So they don't have the same kind of demands around accountability. They sometimes lack training. They sometimes just don't know what to do with the challenges of the disease. Sometimes practitioners lack humility. And I always define humility as the openness to being taught. And sometimes practitioners are a little bit unwilling to learn and unwilling to be taught by family members about what the right thing is to do. So providers are imperfect. They have limitations and difficulties just like everybody else, but we try as we might. It's true that the mental health system fails often to give caregivers the support that they need. And the result of that is that families often feel stressed and disconnected from services and confused and uncertain about what to do next. Families often feel alone in this struggle, like there's nobody else that this happens to except for them. And really, that's a difficult place to be. And families are frustrated and angry as a result of that. Their loved ones and the whole family are in pain. The odds of recovery get reduced because of this difficulty in the family. This is not a good thing. When families are struggling this way, it's bad for them, and it's bad for the recovery of the person in the family who has a serious mental illness. So what do we need to do? Families need to work on recovery themselves, and providers need to support families with their own recovery. The onset of mental illness is a crisis that few families are prepared for. Right? So we need to find a way to help families get through that process of recovery, and that process is similar to recovery from almost any other crisis. When family members are recovering, they tend to go through 4 stages. One is initial shock and denial and disbelief. They get through that, and they get to a period of recognition and acceptance that this is happening. They get after that into a period of coping with the difficulties, and then many families get to the point of moving into personal and political advocacy associated with this. I want to talk about each of those stages a little bit, and then I want to offer some practical strategies for supporting families moving through this recovery process. So in shock, this first stage, they're at a stage of what is happening? This can't be happening in my family. I don't believe that this is going on. How can my loved one have schizophrenia, right? And this kind of denial and belief can be really long-lasting. People can get stuck in it for a long time, and it can take the form of unreasonable hopes about this. If only we could get my family member to change their diet, this would be better. It's not really a mental illness, it's a nutritional problem. More vitamin B is going to fix it. Sometimes if only they didn't spend time with those rotten friends that they're hanging around, if we could get them to spend time with better friends, this would all get fixed. If I could only find the right medicine, they'd be cured. So this doctor didn't work, let me take them to another doctor because they'll be able to find a cure, or they'll grow out of this. It's just a phase that they're going through. Those are all versions of disbelief and denial that there's a serious mental illness underway. And it's a normal, natural response to this kind of a crisis. The denial is compounded by the fact that serious mental illness is episodic. Right? People get better and they get worse, and they get better again and they get worse. And every time they get better, it gives the family the opportunity to say, it was just a stage that they were going through. Now they're better. Oh, that new medicine worked. They've gotten better. Now we don't have to worry about it. So as people cycle through this with their mental illness, families cycle through the ups and downs of this as well. So it's compounded by things like that. It's compounded by high expectations that they may have had of their loved one. This was my son or daughter who was going to be the doctor, who was going to be a great success. They were brilliant in school, and now it's not working so well. I can't believe this is happening. Sometimes families need more knowledge and experience. Sometimes families are a little disconnected, and they just don't get engaged enough, so it's easy for them to say, well, it's probably going to get solved, I'll come back later. And sometimes professional support doesn't help them get through it. So denial is compounded by those kinds of factors. How do you break through denial? I think that we as professionals and as family members need to recognize that denial is a normal reaction. It happens to everyone. Every time we have a crisis, the first reaction is, I can't believe this is happening to me. So we shouldn't be judgmental about families. We should accept that this is normal and provide for them lots of emotional support, lots of education, lots of contact with other family members who have gone through the same thing and can tell them, here's what's going on and you'll get through it. It takes a lot of patience and persistence, and it can take a long time. So that's the first stage of denial. Second stage is recognition and acceptance, where the family says, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, this is real for me. I get that this is happening. And families often get very depressed during this period of time. The person that they knew has changed, and that's really painful for the process. The image and the hopes that they had for that person are really challenged, and they accept that it might not ever be the same. They accept that something is going on, and that leads to a level of hopelessness and depression often. And as the person gets better and worse, again, it's a recurrent problem for family members. Oh, I'm glad this is finally over. Oh, wait, it's not over. Oh, it's getting better again. Oh, no, it's getting worse again. That compounds the sense of frustration and depression that occurs, and families get deep into a grieving process as they recognize that this is what's really happening. Okay? When this occurs, two things can happen, and families do both of these. Sometimes they dig in. They say, this is a real thing, it's happening, and we need to get busy and figure out what we're going to do. And sometimes they give up. This is horrible, it'll never get better, I don't know what to do. The challenge is to how to give families the support and education and reassurance that they need to get through this process and move into actually stepping in and being helpful. And hope is an essential part of this. You know, the more that we can help families at this stage have real, genuine hope that things can get better and their loved one can have a real life, it's critical to helping them break through this process. The third stage of this is coping. And this begins to happen after people emerge from some of the grieving. They begin to recognize that life goes on. You know, it's like, this is a terrible thing that's happened, but we're going to have to figure out how to move ahead. And they begin to incorporate the notion that we're in this for the long term. My family member is not going to get better next week or next month. We need to figure how, as a family, we're going to support this loved one over the long term. You know, sometimes families in this process get into a real take charge mode, you know. They want to be really directive about it, you know. We're in this for the long term. I'm going to take charge. I'm going to help get this fixed. I'm going to make sure that things work out okay. And sometimes can be very assertive, and sometimes that crosses over into being intrusive. And that's a pretty normal reaction. You know, eventually families figure out that no one has all the answers, that there are going to be ups and downs, that there's no magic solution to it, that they can't control all of it, and get busy focusing on practical problem solving for this. It goes on for the life of the illness. Coping isn't something that happens and now we're done with it. You know, this is a long-term illness, and the work that we do happens on a day-to-day basis, has ups and downs just like the illness. And even though families may have dug into coping, you know, they still have hopes for some kind of a cure. Maybe it will get better, maybe we can fix this permanently, maybe it'll go away permanently. And in this stage, they balance that sense of, how do I have realistic hope, and how do I stay practical and balanced about what I need to do today. We need to do, as professionals with families, long-term support and education and advice for them. It's a really important thing for professionals and families to develop tight relationships so that they can work together in supporting the individual with a serious mental illness. And professionals play a big role in being able to do that, because families are trying to cope with situations that they've never seen before. And professionals who have done this work for a long time have the advantage of saying, you know, I've seen this a lot of times before. I can offer you good practical advice. So professionals staying close to families at this stage is really important. Often family members, as they're at this for a long time, are transformed themselves by this crisis. You know, they develop their own sense of personal power as a result of this, and they develop a desire to help other family members who have gone through this, and to make sure that the kinds of services that they've struggled to make available for their loved one are more available for other people in the community. And we've heard a number of comments about that in here already today, where people are saying, how do we make sure that these services are available? How do we support other people in the community? If people don't have a lot of money, how do we make sure that they can get what they need? Family members who have gone through these struggles and come out the other side are often very connected and committed to the notion of they can be very important in helping other families, and they can be very important in advocating for a better system of care, whether that's political advocacy for changes in healthcare policy, or whether it's joining a board like the Board of Trustees for Caravan of Life and Recovery House and building services that way. They work together at that point with professionals as equals, and it helps them to make sense of their own personal journey around this. You know, I mentioned earlier that I had a son who died of sudden infant death syndrome, and I got very involved as a result of that in parent support groups, and very involved in advocacy around education for the broader community about prevention strategies. And it wasn't because I wasn't aware of sudden infant death before. but it means something different after you've been through it. And this is the experience for families. Families certainly are aware that serious mental illness exists, and that everybody wishes that services were better, and that's a good thing, but we've all got busy lives. If you've been through it yourself, it focuses your attention in a really unique way. And that's what happens in this. And families often find this kind of a process of being involved in advocacy and building better services as really uplifting for them as well. Now, I talked about those 4 stages as though they're linear. You're in denial, and then you get through with denial, and you go into acceptance, and after acceptance you go into coping, and so on. But they don't necessarily happen exactly that way. Remember, mental illness is cyclical. There are periods of doing well and doing less well, and family response may be cyclical. You may have families who are at a point where, it looks like they're doing coping, and they've got optimism, and they're really dug in and doing lots of things to help their loved one do better, and their loved one crashes and has a terrible recurrence of mental illness and is hospitalized and doing really badly. And families may experience denial again. They may experience all of the depression that goes along with acceptance again. So that this process is, I describe it as linear, but families may go through it in ways that are more cyclical than that. And this is hard for families, and as professionals we need to keep that in mind, and we need to be continuously supportive of families. The one thing I always say to professionals when I do training about this is that most families get really good at walking this path. Most families figure out a way to get through this, and they fully recover over time, but it isn't easy. And everything that the mental health provider system can do to support families in this process is really important. If for no other reason than families deserve kindness and support and compassion, and if for no other reason because we know that if we do that well with families, our clients, their loved ones, will also tend to do better. So let me talk for a little bit about, work at my timing on this. Let me talk for about 15 minutes or so on practical strategies for helping families to do well. Number one, I think it's important to keep in mind that what we want to do to support families looks different depending on the stage that they're in. If families are in denial, you don't want to start talking with them about the hope of recovery and how great things are going to be, and why don't you start advocating for better services, right? It just doesn't fit for them. They're not ready for that. If families are in denial, they need emotional support. They need people to wrap around them and help them get through the emotional component of that. When people are at that stage of recognition, recognition and acceptance, I know that this is really going on, they need information. They need to know, what do we know about diagnosis and prognosis and treatment options? The more information they get, the better they feel. When they're in a stage of coping, they need practical advice. I'm trying to figure out how to get along and solve problems. My loved one is sleeping all day and staying up all night and smoking and burning holes in the furniture. How do I deal with that? They need practical advice for coping with situations. And in advocacy, they need help around forming educational and support systems, help around public policy and advocacy. So at different stages, people need different things, and we need to get better at supporting them in the right way. If we do too much of the wrong thing at the wrong time, it's not helpful and may actually push families away. Number two, we need to use educational interventions freely. This is a complicated illness. The mental health system is a complicated place to try to navigate. The more information that we can give families, the better. There's a lot to learn with it, and we need to tailor that teaching to the individual family. Some families will do really well if you give them a list of 10 different articles to read and 5 different books to buy about this. Other families, don't want that so much. They want to have conversations with you about it. So we need to tailor the way that we teach families to what the family's abilities and interests and learning styles are. We also need to pay attention to teaching the best research that we have available. We need to be clear with families about what the field is saying today, not what the field was saying 10 years ago. And we need to focus on giving them information in a variety of ways. You know, we've discovered that if we just tell families, it's true for almost anybody, if we just use one way of trying to teach, people don't get it so well. We can talk with them about it, we can give them handouts, we can refer them to websites, we can see if they can connect to other people who can help them and give them information. The more variety that we can offer in terms of offering intervention, the better off we are. But family education, we know that if you do nothing else other than give families more information, families do better and report higher levels of success. We need to help families find the right resources. And the right resources vary by family, but generally speaking, families do well if they can find other families who've had the same thing. Caravan of Life Recovery House runs a family support group and a family psychoeducation group, and I had the privilege to sit with many of those families earlier this week. And you know, one of the most wonderful things about that evening were the families talking to each other and sharing their experiences, and the sense that we're not alone in this. You know, I understand your story, let me share mine. So helping families find those kinds of resources, helping them find the right providers and advocates, helping them find legal advice if they need that. You know, whatever it takes, connecting families to resources is a really welcome thing. I think when we're working with families, we also have to be really good at learning to respond to intense feelings. Families often feel really angry and hopeless and sad and guilty, and it's really hard sometimes when you're working with families to stay with them at that moment. There's a tendency when they say, you know, why aren't you fixing this for me? Why aren't you doing better services? Where were you when I needed you? For us to get defensive as professionals and say, well, don't blame me, you know. At that time, we need to find ways to lean in and be more supportive. And what I found is the very best way to do that is just to get really good at being able to say to the family, gee, you know, you feel really angry because the mental health services that we have weren't able to fix it. And you can just see the family emotion begin to drift away and say, yeah, that's exactly right. Let me tell you about how hard it was for me. If we can recognize those feelings and support them in that, they do better. There was a wonderful study that was done at a mental health center near Coney Island in New York City, where the mental health system said, we're going to do a radical new intervention for families because family therapy's not working very well for families that have serious mental illness. So the whole intervention was the social worker would go out to the home of the family and say to the family, you know, you've really got a tough situation here, and the mental health center hasn't been able to be very helpful to you. That was the whole thing. And the amazing thing was, not only did families feel better and report high levels of satisfaction, but their loved ones improved. Right? Just offering basic emotional support to families is good for the family, and it's really good for their loved ones. So step in and be understanding is what that means. There was a lot of talk earlier today about what to do with diverse beliefs and diverse spiritual beliefs and diverse understandings about what causes mental illness. And we need to recognize that families are really different from each other. There are a lot of different ways to be in the world, a lot of theories about mental illness, and none of us have all the answers. And we need to be respectful of those differences and build partnerships around those differences. I've seen programs in the United States on Native American reservations where spiritual healers and mental health professionals partner together to do good work. You know, and the sense is that the spiritual healer can do some things and the mental health professional can do some things, and together they're a really great team. And that can work well. It's a way of recognizing that we don't need to tell people that there's something wrong with their beliefs, that we can work within their beliefs and still do good work. So recognizing those diverse beliefs is important. We also need to recognize family strengths and cheer about those. You know, while every family has problems, every family has strengths as well. And sometimes, you know, we're too focused on what the family is not doing and the ways the family is failing, and instead we should be focused on the things that they're doing. You know, it may be, for example, that we have concern about a family who is being too protective of their loved one and saying to them, you know, I'm worried about you going off to part-time employment because maybe it's going to be too stressful for you, and I want to protect you and keep you here because I'm worried about you. You know, instead of saying, you know, come on, Mom, give your child a chance. You know, you should give up that kind of belief, you know, there's something wrong with you being so cautious. We can celebrate that mother's concern and caring and support and love and patience and work within that and build on that, and to say, you know, I know you love your son. I know you're very concerned and worried about how do we build a plan that allows them to go out and work part-time, but we get them extra support along the way so it feels safer for everyone. You don't have to take away people's concerns, and you don't have to blame people. You can use it as a strength and build on it as you're working with families. You also have to be clear as a mental health provider or an advocate or a peer educator about the limitations in the mental health system. We can't fix everything. We don't have the time, energy, money, or expertise to fix everything. And I think we always need to be cautious about what our limitations are and be clear with families about what we can do and what we can't do. Much better to have families recognize that we have limitations than to have them discover it on themselves and be angry and disappointed about it. Including families in all aspects of treatment is a really important thing. I think it's important to invite families to everything you can invite them to. Coming to the program, being part of treatment planning meetings, you know, if we can get your client to give permission for that, supporting their active involvement, those kinds of things are really important. You know, having the family as a partner means you've got to have them there. So including them in the planning is a good thing. Family support groups I mentioned a few minutes ago are hugely important. One of the most important things that's happened in the United States around family work for people with serious mental illness has been the formation of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, which now has hundreds of thousands of members across the country, runs support and education groups. It's a really powerful thing. And so helping families to organize together and to find each other and to build their own support systems is a really important thing to do to make it sustainable. Helping families to maintain perspective. This is that point I said about helping families to recognize that there is hope for recovery. Doing it at the right time is the important thing to do. Helping them when they're at stages of recognition, at stages of coping, at stages of advocacy, this can be really helpful. All of us in the system need to take really good care of ourselves, because whether you're a caregiver, this is really hard work. If you're a provider, it's really hard work. If you're a client, this is really hard work. It's tough for everybody in this mix, and so we need to pay attention to staying healthy and keep our own energy levels good. I mean, you need stamina, you need to be emotionally available, and so we've got to pay attention to our own diet and exercise and sleep and balance in our lives. You know, one of the things that we often do when we work with families is that we see families who are killing themselves trying to do caregiving. They've given up their entire life and are burning themselves out and ruining their health as a result of their caregiving. That is not good for anyone. You know, we need to help them understand we want them in this for the long term, and they've got to take good care of themselves along the way if they're going to stay in for the long term. Making a personal commitment. What are you going to do personally to make a difference in this? Just a couple of other things in closing. You know, I mentioned humility earlier as the openness to being taught, and I think that this is so critical in family work. We need to be open every day to learning from our clients and our family members and our peers, from research, from our own experience, from each other. You know, we can't ever believe that we have it all figured out. We need to do this work one day at a time. Right? There's no magic solution. We're not going to get it fixed overnight, but if we're patient, if we're persistent, we can make progress along the way. It'll never be perfect, but we can make it better. We can support families in making their lives better. We can help them to support their loved one, and in the end, we can improve outcomes and improve recovery odds for people with serious mental illness. So let me stop with that and see a little reaction.
Well, thank you so much for a whole lot of really great information. Let me know if you can't hear me. I'm here not because I'm a trustee. I'm here because I'm a caregiver. I've been a caregiver for 50 years. My sister has suffered, one of my sisters, from schizophrenia for 50 years. So all I have to say is through that experience. I have hundreds of things that I want to share with you, but I'm not going to because we don't have the time. So I'm going to make just 4 or 5 comments because I would like to start a dialogue and a discussion. I think we learn more when we participate. So let me just make those 4 or 5 points. First point is from the point of view of the recovery house. How does the recovery house look at families? From the recovery house's point of view, which is the treatment, the rehabilitation process, we will not treat anybody whose family is not willing to be part of the program. That is how important we think the family is. If the family says, take care, we're not going to come for your meetings, we're going on a vacation, we have better things to do, we'll say, we're not admitting this client. So, very important. The role of the family in rehabilitation is so important that we will refuse to treat unless the family is part of the program. So we do understand. The second part, as far as the recovery house is concerned, is so we ask them one fundamental question: who is the caregiver? And this is an official title. They have to sign a document at the recovery house and sort of say, this is the principal caregiver. Because next step, it's not the whole family who's treating. We can't involve everyone, mother-in-law, father-in-law, uncle, aunt. It won't work. Somebody has to take responsibility, and so officially, caregiver. The next question is, what if the caregiver isn't around or is on vacation or something else? What's the backup? Caregiver number 2. And just in case something happens that we need somebody else, caregiver number 3. We take, therefore, formally at the time of admission, the names of 3 caregivers and also who is the first caregiver, because the other 3, the other 2 may not be that involved. So that is as far as the recovery house is concerned as to how important this is. Now, we can give the caregiver a job description. And we need to, because the caregiver says, all right, now you've given me a title and a position, give me a job description. And we will. So that's part of the process. They know what they have to do. They've been doing it. Maybe they've not been doing it all right. But guess what goes on the top of the job description? Number 1, this is a thankless job. Number 2, there is no salary. Let us be clear, therefore, and you know this. But I think we need to emphasize this. This is a voluntary position that you have volunteered for, that you've inherited or whatever it is, or you've not inherited. This is, it's not necessary that the principal caregiver, you have to decide, is it the father? Is it the mother? Sometimes it's neither. Sometimes it's the brother. Sometimes it's the sister. So it is not automatic who the caregiver is. The caregiver is the one who cares. And so we have to identify that. Who is it that cares? So this is from the point of view of the recovery house, that the importance of the family is there. Now families have here in Pakistan so many issues because the families are evolving. Now we have two-income families. Now we have families who are going abroad. So we have come across many, many situations where half the family has gone abroad. All the young people have gone or moved to another city. And who is left? The old parents, who themselves need care. They are on wheelchairs. They need to go to a hospital. They are weak. And they are being abused or they are being beaten up by their own child. So look at the family dynamics and what. So we see this on a daily basis, or that the main income provider has passed away and it's left to whoever is left. This is not news to us. This is not news to you. But this is what it is. The family dynamics are as important as the family is. The family has its own issues, serious issues. And then they say, how do we deal with this? So, the other point is, and we can talk about it as much as long, whatever you want, the family has a role, before they come to us, they have a role in aggravating the illness. They don't know this. But if they are in denial, as Tony has sort of said, then they're treating the person as a normal person. And if you treat a mentally ill person as a normal person, it will have the opposite effect. So they have a role. And then they come to us and they find out that is mentally ill, then they sort of say, oh, what did I do wrong? Especially the mother. Where did I fail in my upbringing? So the guilt comes in there also. This is part of that whole process. So the family then has a role during the treatment. So the first is before they came to us, the second is while we are there, and we are there to hold hands. So during the treatment, we are going to be doing counseling, we are going to tell them, we are going to answer their questions, how long is it going to take, and frequently their questions are, why is the medicine not working? Well, this is a rehab center, right? It's not just medicine. And so there's a whole educational process where we have to transition them from the fact that it's not just the medicine. The medicine, in fact, is working. Maybe there are other things not working. Maybe it will take time, right? Then the third part of the role is after an element of recovery has taken place, and then they have another role. Okay, now we've discharged them. Now they've returned home. They need to know how to treat them. Otherwise, and again this happens, there will be a relapse. Because of the way the family deals with the situation or does not deal with the situation. Now they've away from the professional, they've gone away. So it is our role as professionals to prepare them, to explain to them what might have happened before, and that they should not feel guilty, that it was not their problem, it was not they didn't do anything really wrong, they were just being normal. To train them while they're in our care and sort of say, answer all their questions and tell them how to be partners. And lastly, how to deal with the situation after they have recovered. So that's a whole lot of education that has to be done, and we will do that. Now, last thing before we open up to question is that families sometimes have to be the bad guys. And sometimes they have a difficulty. No one comes, maybe an exception, no one comes to us, no one walks in sort of says, I'm suffering from a mental illness, I need help. They are all brought in by their families. Now, if they're all brought in by their families and they continue to say to us, why am I here? And we say, well, you're here for treatment, and well, but I think I'm well, but your family doesn't think you're well. And the families come back to us, why are you telling this? You know, now they are going to blame us. We want to be the good guys. And we say, sorry. You have to be agreeable to be the bad guys. If you want us to be the bad guys, we are happy to be the bad guys, but that's not good. That's not good treatment. You know, we have to sort of work with it jointly. So those are some of the important points I wanted to make, and I think we're ready for